Rachel Reeves is in a bit of a fiscal pickle at the moment. The ever-increasing demands of public services that are already creaking at the seams means that according to the NIESR, she needs to find around £50 billion of extra tax revenue by 2029 to stick to her self-imposed fiscal rules and rebuild her fiscal headroom, which is usually around about £10 billion. There is, however, one big problem. And that's the fact that not only has she imposed a straitjacket on herself with those fiscal rules, Labour have also ruled out tax rises on working people. So what that means is no increase on the rates of income tax, national insurance for workers, that is, or VAT. This drastically constrains where the government can raise additional revenue to ensure her first fiscal rule is met, which is where she has day-to-day spending matching with tax receipts, right? So she's having to scrabble around for other ways of increasing taxes, which we've seen recently with the rise of employers' national insurance, the application of VAT to private school fees, and reducing inheritance tax giveaways for agricultural property. Now, with the autumn budget looming, Labour have been subtly leaking ideas for tax increases to the press to gauge the public's opinions. And the latest one has really riled up the right wing. The Treasury are reportedly considering imposing national insurance onto landlords' rental income, a move that could potentially raise billions, as there was over £27 billion of net property income in 2023. According to The Telegraph, the most common income bracket for property income was £50,000 to £70,000, representing 360,000 landlords. And applying national insurance would cost each one just over £1,000 extra each year. Just to make that clear, right, a significant number of landlords are making significantly more than the median wage in this country, sitting on their backsides, pocketing sometimes as much as 40% of the incomes of the actually economically active people in this country. Now, far be it from me to defend the Labour government, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And anything that gets landlords mad, sorry. I'll use the gender-neutral term, land bastards. This gets 2 thumbs up from me. As you can imagine, this hasn't gone down well with the idle right. Here's the famous fiscal policy super genius Kwasi Kwarteng. Taxing landlords and pensioners is Marxist nonsense. Now, if Rachel Reeves is a Marxist, that must make me Amadeo Bordiga. Other members of the Land Bastard Club called into the Jeremy Vine show yesterday. Here's what Simon had to say about the proposals.
Simon in Manchester, you're a landlord, I gather, Simon?
I am indeed. And
May I ask how many properties you have?
I've got 2.
2, okay, so what, the one you live in and one other, or 3 in total?
Well, 3, yeah, my own home and then 2.
Forgive me for asking. So would you be able to pay national insurance, or would that mean you went into loss?
It's not whether I should pay it, it's whether the tenants can afford to pay it. It will go on the rent. Right. There is no ifs and buts about this, I assure you. The tenants, in the end, this is not a tax on landlords, it's a tax on tenants. They will pay this NI. NI is based upon, obviously, income, workers. The government are categorising buy-to-let landlords as investors. So are we workers or are we investors? Because as an investor, you don't pay NI.
Hang on. I thought that they kept telling us silly little Marxists that being a landlord was a job. But now it's not work, it's just investment income. Okay, fair enough then. Apparently it's okay for people who go out and work and actually be productive to pay national insurance on our income. But the economically inactive landlords are supposed to get away with not paying it. No wonder we have a productivity crisis. Now here was how Novara Media's own Michael Walker, who was on the panel, responded to Simon's claim about being a, quote, tax on tenants.
Simon, how do you set the rent in your properties? How do you decide what rent to charge?
Yeah, I look at the market rent. I'm about probably 15-20% below market rent on my properties. This will take it pretty much up to market rent. Other landlords will probably then go higher, I would imagine, if they're at market rent, which will then reset the market rent, because the market rent is set, of course, as you know, by the market.
Yeah, but the market rent is set by supply and demand, and not really by the cost of the landlord, I would hazard. So there might be people like you. You say you're charging 20% less than the market rent, so maybe yours would go up. But for many people, they own a home outright, and they still rent it at the market rent. So they can't claim that it's costs which is setting the price. What's setting the price is how many rental properties there are and how many people want to rent them.
Yeah. I mean, to a degree, I agree. But as an investor, this is why are we different than any other investor? We're not. We're there to maximise the income that we've invested in that property, and if we see that our costs are going up, to keep the profit margin, like the supermarkets do, the petrol stations do. We're just an investor, or are we a worker? What are we?
So I would say you're a rentier. So I suppose the difference...
Rentier?
A rentier. So you're someone who hasn't really created anything. So an investor in a car company, for example, or an entrepreneur, you've invested money in a factory which produces something.
Well, he's done the same.
But he's providing accommodation.
No, because you haven't made anything. I mean, did you build the house? Did you pay for a house to get built? No, you bought a house which already existed and you took it off the market and now you charge other people to use it.
I mean, he is absolutely right. Like, landlords don't just allow their houses to collapse if they sell it. Here, they've taken it off the market, where someone who could buy it and live in it and own the house themselves could have done so, could be owned by a housing cooperative, or indeed could be bought by the council. But no, he is taking it off the market. And then he says at the end there, oh, well, we're investors, want to maximize our revenue. But at the start, he's like, oh no, I'm charging less than market rent. I'm such a benevolent landlord who's not actually doing what I said I did later in maximizing my income. No, I'm benevolent and I'm only charging under market rent. It is weird that every single time this comes up, every landlord claims that they pay under market rent. But when was the last time that you ever met a landlord who wouldn't raise the rent if they could, right? Because they raise the rent whether or not we do any kind of legislation that gives rights to renters. They will raise the rent regardless of whether or not the interest rates go up or down. Have they ever reduced rent when the interest rates have dropped? No, these things never happen. So quite frankly, I don't believe Simon a word of what he's saying there in terms of the market rent. And Michael fundamentally is right. The intersection of the supply-demand curve is where the price is set. Applying a tax to that, or indeed, if there was already a tax and removing it, would not change this. We've seen this, for example, when the tax was taken away from menstrual products. It didn't actually change the price. It was just the revenue was increased for the people producing the product because the supply-demand curve is where that price was met. Now, it wasn't just Simon who called in to the show to speak to Michael about the landlord problem. Here's Anne-Marie, who's also furious at the idea of paying the same taxes that everybody else pays.
I think they're right to put more taxes on landlords.
No, it's not. It shouldn't be allowed. I mean, we paid stamp duty when I bought the property.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, paid stamp duty. Every year I do a tax return and pay more tax on the income that I've made. And then now they're going to put extra tax on. Oh, sorry.
That's all right. You've done it.
Yeah, and the mortgage went up. I've still got mortgages on the rental properties.
How many, may I ask you, as well as your own home, Anne-Marie, how many other properties have you got?
3.
See, I don't know whether Michael might say that's too many for a person.
Well, I would hazard a guess, Anne-Marie, that what you're doing is you've bought houses on a buy-to-let mortgage, and then you've got people living in those houses who are going out and working every day, and they're giving you a third of their income to buy you those houses. Now, I don't want to judge you as a person. I think that's, it's a reasonable investment to make. People want to fund their own retirements. That's fine with me. But as a way to manage the economy, having these working families or working young people working for 30% of their week to pay you to buy you 3 extra houses doesn't seem like a particularly rational way to run the economy.
Anne-Marie?
Well, I've paid tax and on all of. Then I've paid tax yet again. After I've paid my tax, then I pay the mortgage. The mortgage has gone up astronomically, and now there's nothing there for landlords anymore.
Just to confirm, we all pay taxes, right? You're not special, Anne-Marie, that you pay taxes, right? We all do. It's just for some reason your income stream, right? Your income stream of rent, for some reason that's not subject to the same taxes that all of the people in the audience have to pay when they go out and actually do work for their job, right? It does sound to me like Anne-Marie here is retired. And if we want to save for a house or a mortgage, like Michael said, I'm not going to blame you personally. I'm going to judge you, Anne-Marie. It is immoral. It is immoral for you to expect for working people to not only pay for your state pension through taxation, which is perfectly reasonable. I'm glad we have a state pension. I'm glad it is triple locked. I am glad that we provide levels of universal support for the elderly. But then to expect all these people to buy you 3 houses, again, buying you 3 houses for free, because the rent also pays for the maintenance. You don't pay that. The tenant pays that as part of the rent. Hence why you're able to make profit off of the rental payments, right? So that you can then have extra on top of that is even more of a pension. No, I'm sorry. I just don't buy that. That's immoral. That's not something that I would ever countenance. And or the further point, it is a terrible way that we have structured this economy. We spent the 90s, the 2000s, not only pandering to existing homeowners, but encouraging people to become multiple homeowners. Things like buy-to-let mortgages, which of course are different from what we're talking about here. But more broadly, we took a system that existed and worked in council housing, we over-commodified it, and then we told people, as part of the property-owning democracy that was pandered to by Thatcher, Major, Blair, Cameron, and onwards, to say, well, you should just buy as many houses as you can. This is your nest egg. This is the wealth that you're creating for yourself, when actually you're not creating wealth for yourself. You are essentially, quite frankly, in a parasitic relationship with your tenants, where you are leeching money off of them every month, again, for just having an asset and doing nothing, sitting on your backside. I'm sorry, this is not a moral way or a just way or indeed a good way to run an economy, because that money just gets funneled back into extra liquidity into the housing market, further pushing up prices, further increasing competition to buy, and further making it harder for people to get onto the housing ladder as young people and to escape the trap of renting, which helps push money into the pockets of existing landlords to be able to overinflate the property market again. It is a vicious cycle that reduces aggregate demand in the actual consumptive economy. And this is why Adam Smith and Karl Marx, two completely opposing people when it comes to ideology, both agreed that landlords are immoral. Aaron, what did you make of those clips?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I thought Michael was fantastic, by the way. Just quickly on tax. So if you're a higher rate taxpayer and you sell a buy-to-let property, as I understand it, maybe there's an accountant in the comments or they're watching this after the show goes up, you pay 24% as capital gains tax, which is to say the increase in the value, you pay 24% on that if you're a higher rate taxpayer, okay? In terms of tax on dividends, you pay 33.75% as a higher rate taxpayer. 33.75%. So if you invest in a company and you're buying stocks in a company, you get dividends back, productive capitalism, right? That's what Michael is talking about, shareholder productive capitalism. You're investing in a firm that makes goods and services that people buy, still capitalism, still exploitative, but there's some use value at the end of it. It's not rentierism most of the time. You're going to pay a higher rate of tax than on the rentier who's been a landlord and then they sell the asset, which has been bought by other people, right? Bought by their tenants, fundamentally. You'll pay a lower rate of tax. Forget even income tax. You're paying a lower rate of tax on that than you are on income tax. Higher rate of income tax, 45%. You're paying 24%. So you're paying lower than that if you were working, and you're paying lower than you would pay as tax on dividends. And of course, lots of self-employed people pay themselves through dividends because it's tax efficient when compared to income tax. Whatever you think about that, right? But even then, they're still paying more than the capital gains that you pay as a landlord when you sell a property, which basically has been bought by your tenants. Why on earth do we have that? And I've said this time after time after time. One of the simplest things we should be doing in this country is equalizing a dividends tax or tax on dividends with capital gains tax. I think basically you should bring capital gains up to where dividends is. Quite simple. Whenever I have this sort of discussion with people on GB News or on the right, they go, I like the sound of that. Yeah, let's bring dividends tax down to CGT. No, I'm not saying that. Bring it up. And I think broadly speaking, you want to equalize capital gains with income tax thresholds, ultimately. You cannot be taxing people more when they work than when they sit on their ass and they get the rent coming in every month. Now, in terms of people that buy properties, there are some examples, for instance, of builders. They might not have paid in PAYE. I know people like this. They buy a nice property. It's in a bad state. They self-exploit for 6 months or a year. They make it nice again. They might build 3 or 4 flats. They sell to, they rent to, whatever. The point is that's their pension nest egg. This happens. I don't necessarily admire that or think it's positive or think it contributes really to a good situation for the country. But we have to be very, very clear. That is also quite different to somebody who's just buying 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'll talk about people that buy many more than that in a moment, who just buy all these properties on buy-to-let mortgages. They are at least adding some value. Okay. I'm not saying they're good people or that I support that. It's a little bit different. And because they've been working in a certain trade where they're not getting PAYE, they're self-employed, that's their pension rather than what we get via Nick's contributions over 25, 30 years. Okay. Slightly different. Then you've got people like a man called Dave Wells in Bournemouth. I was born in Bournemouth. Dave Wells has hundreds of properties, maybe even 1,000 plus. I think it's hundreds. He has hundreds of properties in Bournemouth, often in parts of the town which used to be very, very upmarket during the Victorian era. Now they're basically slums. They're doss houses. He has destroyed entire neighborhoods because he wants to earn money as a landlord, as a land bastard. Okay? So when we talk about land bastards, I'm thinking about Dave Wells. Hundreds of properties so that people can live in absolute penury and dirt. Communities can be destroyed. And by the way, in many of these places, there are also homeowners and they're saying, what the hell happened? I bought a lovely 2-bed flat in a Victorian, terrace. And now the whole place is going to shit. People are coming in and out, dysfunctional families, because guess what? They're being exploited to hell by Dave Wells. Fly tipping everywhere. The two go hand in hand, right? The disintegration of these communities along with these, industrial scale buy-to-let mortgages used by people like Dave Wells, they go hand in hand, right? So someone like Dave Wells should not exist. He should not exist. Shouldn't exist. And I think that's where we start with this debate, is that people that have dozens and hundreds of properties, they shouldn't exist. Those properties should literally be requisitioned from them. Literally requisitioned, taken from them. All right? You start with that. I don't even think that's particularly radical. I actually think I could get lots of right-wing people on board with that, by the way. And quite remarkably, a few years ago, I remember seeing in the local paper, I think in the Daily Echo in Bournemouth, a masterclass, a workshop with Dave Wells, learn the secrets of the real estate trade from the best. The point is, this is not a scalable model for wealth creation. Not everybody can own 500 properties that they rent out. Somebody has to live in the properties, okay? Clearly not a scalable, sustainable model, even for a moderately large middle class. Forget the whole of society. Okay, you're going to have to exploit lots of people to have 500 properties. So clearly not everybody can do it. And then finally, I remember listening to a podcast about a year ago, and there are podcasts, Helena, where landlords and people in this industry talk about where to buy because of the best returns on investment. Buy in Derby. Bombardier have just announced that a couple of hundred new jobs are going to be created up there. Those are really solid contracts there, 5-10 year jobs generally. They'll be on permanent contracts, solid industrial work, union jobs. Those guys are going to be solid. The returns on investment in Derby are great. Go buy in Derby. So if somebody in Bournemouth or in London says, you know what, I'm now going to buy 2 terrace houses in Derby, turn it into 5 flats. These are the people we're talking about. We're talking about investors who are trying to seek returns on investment, who are destroying communities in this country, who are pulling away properties from people in those communities who want to build roots, who want to create stable environments for themselves and their families. This should not be a left-right thing. Now, clearly, on the profit argument, yes, the left is on that. But what you've seen in recent months, Helena, and I find this fascinating, is the right is turning against HMOs. Why are they doing that? Refugees. We don't want any. I never heard people on the right say this about HMOs until refugees were in them. Well, why don't you want refugees in that? We don't know who's in there. You shouldn't be having eight blokes who I've never met all in one house. I wouldn't want them next to my family. Okay, well, would you want a halfway house? Would you want 8 students? Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't want 8 drunken shit. In a perfect world, you wouldn't want it. You'd probably want maybe a couple, maybe a nice, happy group of friends who've lived there 5 years. And here's the thing. The word that the entire political class talk about, community, is impossible without housing security. It doesn't have to be ownership. It can be private rent with a good contract. It can be social housing. But being a member of a community and getting to know people and looking out for one another and adding social and emotional value to people in your immediate surroundings is very hard without housing security. And I think that's something we should be talking about to people beyond the left in the coming years. We need to demonize, and I use that word guardedly, right? I'm not being hyperbolic here. We need to demonize the concept of landlordism at scale. I think if you have more than 4 or 5 properties, which is already very bad, but at least, we can tax that a lot higher. Like I say, CGT can go much higher. We can tax that much higher. You want to do that? Okay, maybe it's your pension, whatever. Maybe that's what you want to do. We can tax it higher. We can disincentivize it. But for the people that have more than 5 rental properties, I'm afraid those days are over. And we need to bring those back into, I think, probably forms of social and municipal ownership. And also I think owner occupancy should be higher. If you look at the countries in the world right now with the highest rates of owner occupancy, they're all either communist or ex-communist countries. Okay? This is a really important issue for me, Helena. I think housing security is something so fundamental. We can absolutely take it beyond a left-wing audience over the next 5 to 10 years.
Imagine what the kids today would say if you told them that in the Soviet Union, rent was 5% of your income. Imagine that. We had an actual housing system that was there to serve a need rather than capital. And whilst you're absolutely right, we should be demonising these big landlords. I remember seeing a story about one person who bought out an entire village in Wales, like a historic village, right? These people are genuinely the enemy of society, in my opinion. Those kind of people who will have these massive portfolios. They destroy communities, you're so right. But what I will say is that despite demonising these large landlords at scale, I do think that broadly there needs to be, as Mick Lynch pointed out on Downstream, that we need to start having this kind of this concerted effort to make people revile landlordism as a concept, regardless of the size, right? Because at the end of the day, it is the landlord class that has been encouraged over the last kind of 30 years since the advent of right to buy, since the financial bubble that led up to 2008, since the low interest rate kind of mortgage bonanza that was available during the Osborne era, that has just created an entire class of landlords. Broadly, these people are boomers, just through the fault of who was available and had capital at the time. And those people are taking a huge amount, an absolute gargantuan amount of wealth out of the hands of young, struggling people working hard, keeping this economy going. And it's essentially being used to be able to put these people on cruises in the Med. And whilst it's certainly bad that there are huge corporate landlords, the BlackRocks and Lloyds banks of this world, who are buying up loads of residential property. There are people who get involved with developers who only will sell for buy-to-let, who won't even buy for owner occupancy, right? This system is all bad. This system is all bad. But whilst it's definitely worse if you're doing it at scale, the way in which that the neoliberal paradigm of greed is good and the market will out has led to the mindset of a generation of people that thinks that there is nothing wrong with landlordism because it's just interacting with the market, regardless of the negative social utility. To be able to change that, of course, we should turn tax them out of existence. We should disincentivize it through policy. I think there needs to be public demonization of the act of rentierism, the act of landlordism, to get these people to understand that it's not just a blank canvas. It's not just an empty suit who you're taking a third of the paycheck, 40, 50% in some cases in London. It's a real person with real aspirations who shouldn't be buying you your extra house and who shouldn't be buying you your extra pension. Go sell the house to someone who'll live in it and go buy some shares. Because that at the very least isn't taking money out of a poor person's hands.